Oh, there we go. Hey, everybody. Hello. Sorry, I was about to go live, and the camera literally, it was black, inexplicably. There wasn't a good reason for it. Also, I don't know why, but I'm not really sure where my headphones are that I normally have plugged in, so I can't hear myself. I can't hear what's coming through the recording. So if you could give me a thumbs up if everything sounds good, that would be great. Because I don't know if it's. I'm assuming it sounds okay, but I can't hear myself. So, if you'll give me a thumbs up, then just that everything sounds good, that would be very, very helpful for me. As I have no idea where the headphones are. I really don't. I thought they were in my backpack, and then I thought they were in my truck, and then I don't know. Thumbs up. Okay, good. As long as it doesn't sound that weird muted sound or anything, so it should be fine. I just it's weird. It's weird when you can't hear yourself, like you can't hear what it sounds like through the recording. So it is what it is though. Let's see here. There we go. All right, guys. Glad you all are. Wait, is that the one I want? Yeah, that's the one I want. Boom. Glad you all are here and on and listening, watching. I know some of you have some kiddos over in the other side of the building right now that are talking about some basically what it means to be a Christian in a biblical sense. You know what it means to actually to walk with the Lord. You know, and not that anyone, I'd say none of us can ever fully understand that in this life, but the idea is so that we can stand before Jesus one day and know that we've done all we could to share all of his truth with our kids. And so you can pray for Kelly back there doing that with the kiddos right now, and I know there's a few other adults doing it too, so if you could pray for them and all that's going to entail, that would be great. Also, a quick one or two quick announcements. I'm going to do this in an odd way, I guess. But let me skip ahead over here. So Sunday mornings at 8:30, men, join us 8:30. It's been good this last week, and I'm expecting more good things as we move forward. So Jonas, we're talking through a book right now, and I think it's going pretty well. So if you'll join us for that, you know about Kelly's thing. But parents, this Friday night from 6 to 8:30, you can drop your kids off and go take a nap, grocery shopping, go on a date. We don't care. But let me make sure we understand this. This is not. I know this sounds weird, but this particular event is not a community babysitting service. As much as that would be a great thing. It's not what this is designed for. Crosspoint families. Because that helps us to manage who we know is coming and all that. So for Crosspoint families. Tell Kelly you're gonna come bring your kids so we know how to prepare for food and stuff. And if you have a kid that would like to bring a friend, talk to Kelly about that, because we had someone do that last time and it was fine. But if there's we can't, we're not necessarily set up to handle like 500 kids, so talk to Kelly, let her know you're coming, let her know your kid or kids will be there. And I believe there is an age minimum, like I don't remember what it is. Mallory, you might know what that is. I can't remember what it is. There's an age minimum, I think, for the parents' night out, and it might be 4 or 5 years old. I can't fully remember. But Mallory, if you know, you could type that into the comments box there, or Michael, if you know. One of you guys, if you know what the minimum is, that would be very helpful. So yeah, that's going to happen this coming Friday. So I want you to be aware of that. And I believe, yeah, we have camp, but we'll talk more about that when we get a sign up. So, all right, there it is. And let me say again, as you often, I think it's 4 or 5 years old, because the idea is we want them to be like plenty down the road, potty training and all that. So it just makes it makes things a lot simpler. Okay, so I'll get Kelly. We'll send a message out to you guys about that, about what it was. Yeah, Marlene, I think it's 4 or 5, something like that. So, all right. So as I always say every week, if you have a question, I want to hear it. I want to talk about it. I want to discuss it. I want to ramble about it. So if you have one, drop it in the comments, and we'll address it as best as we can, and talk through it. Otherwise, I have some things to talk about. But I always tell you guys, I always love hearing from you and what you're thinking about, what you're pondering. Maybe something you read, something I said. If you get something out of the muddled, miry mess of Sunday from me talking, that's what it felt like, at least up there. But if you have any thoughts, any questions, anything you're just wondering about, that's gone well. We've done that, so please drop those in there, and I'll even if it's in the middle of me talking and we're addressing something else, I will stop what I'm doing, and as soon as I get a moment, we'll kind of draw that to a close, and we'll jump right into your question. I'll piggyback over to there. So like I said, I'd rather talk about what you're thinking about than just talk about something that's way off in left field that is irrelevant to you. So yeah, we jumped back into Second Chronicles. So let's get going. We jumped back into Second Chronicles on Sunday, and we'll be there until we're not. And we talked about Rehoboam, and Rehoboam is who comes after Solomon, who's king over all of Israel, and then he makes a dumb decision, and the kingdom is split in two, and Rehoboam is king over the southern kingdom of Judah. And his counterpart in the north, in the kingdom that's called Israel, is Jeroboam. So Rehoboam in the south, Jeroboam in the north. And neither one of them do well for themselves. But Jeroboam in particular does poorly. And I say that like, sin is sin, right? Sin is sin is sin is sin. But there are some that go much farther to leading others and contributing to others' sin. Like it's almost like their effort in life is to do that. And so Jeroboam, that is what is remembered about him in Scripture. And so I think it's important as we walk through these kings in Judah. Second Chronicles focuses in on Judah, and what the idea is that Judah is, Jerusalem is in Judah. Israel has no good kings. Judah has a few, and the idea is that there's a little more going on there spiritually. Like, even though we read Sunday, it says that Rehoboam, did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord. It said, but there was still good things. There were still some good things, and that's never really said about Israel. And so there's a contrast there between Judah and Israel, kind of the rest of the time. And First and Second Kings focuses on Israel, but mentions the kings of Judah. All right, and Second Chronicles focuses on the kings of Judah, while mentioning the kings of Israel. So we got a mention of Jeroboam on Sunday, while it focused on Rehoboam, right? And if you go to First Kings, you'll see a mention of Rehoboam with a lot on Jeroboam, because it's focused in there, and that's a really good thing. Thanks to the Holy Spirit, we get different accounts for these things. They're not all the same stories; they are different accounts, and we get different perspectives. So that if you read, for example, for this coming Sunday, if you were to read in Second Chronicles about the king that we'll talk about on Sunday, there are details that you will not know, you will not hear about, that if you go and you read in First Kings, there's some little pieces of information that help complete the picture, right? So that's kind of where we're at with all that. Like I said, if you guys have any questions about any of this, I want to know, want to hear. I don't really like giving speeches. I prefer there to be conversations. So anything that pops to mind, anything you're wondering about as I talk, please throw it in the comments. Please drop it in there, and we'll address it. But I do want to talk a little bit about Jeroboam, because it's important to understand the dynamic here as the kingdom is split, to knowing why there's such a divide. Why it's not just like, oh, why don't they, they hang out with each other, they cross the borders, and why isn't it friendly? Well, Jeroboam does something, once he comes to power, Jeroboam does something pretty awful, and it's in 1 Kings 12. In fact, 12, 13, and 14 are kind of devoted mainly to Jeroboam. But I'm just going to read here in 1 Kings 12. It says this, starting in verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there, and he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart. Now, when it says he said in his heart, this is Jeroboam. This would be the same as you and me saying, I was thinking, I was pondering, I was considering what to do. So this is where I would tell you that we always think that sin is something you do. It's not. Sin starts in the heart before it ever makes it to the action, to your actions, right? So even if you don't commit the action of sin, you still may have something that you need to repent of, because there's a motivation, a rebellious motivation in your heart, all right? And so Jesus died to redeem the action and the motivation behind it, all right? So I think we need to understand that sin or rebellion is both the motivation and the action, not simply one or the other, all right? And so it says here, Jeroboam said in his heart, he's thinking to himself, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. In other words, everyone's going to want to go to the house of David. Rehoboam is in the line of David, so Jeroboam is afraid people are going to want to be in the kingdom where the king is from the line of David, and Jeroboam isn't. And so he says this in verse 27, if the people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, which is in Judah, then the heart of the people will turn again to their Lord. And it says it's a capital Lord. But I would tell you that Jeroboam is not so much worried about Rehoboam as much as he's worried about their Lord, the God that they serve. And it says they will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Now, I would tell you, he says Rehoboam, but he's more concerned about them going to the temple, which means he understands that so much of their life is wrapped up in who their God is and how God has rescued them from slavery and brought them into this promised land. And now Jeroboam is afraid, oh no, they're not going to want to go with me, because David is such a central figure to the life of Israel that to go and say I'm cool with the king who's not in the line of David, like said no Jew ever, so he's worried about that. And he says, so the king took counsel, and he does this. He made two calves of gold, and he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. What a massively bold statement. Took a lot of cojones. And if I could contrast against Exodus 32, where God, where it shows us that Aaron makes golden calves. People bring the jewelry, and they tell Aaron to make him a golden calf. And he took it and he fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf in Exodus 32:4 and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And if you remember, after that happens, Rehoboam, or after that happens in Israel, Moses comes down and smashes the golden calf to tiny pieces, and they have to drink the gold, and it's a whole big thing, right? It's an awful deal. So here, Rehoboam makes the same exact mistake. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right? So Rehoboam makes the same mistake, and he says, I'm afraid of the people going to Israel. So he makes gods so they can worship. They can worship God, but they can worship it by bowing down to these calves. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Now, Dan is at the very north, and Bethel is at the south. So what he's doing is he's saying, so that no one ever leaves the kingdom. All right, we're going to put these golden calves, so wherever you are, you can get to worship one of these, and you don't have to leave the country. You don't have to go to Jerusalem to worship. You don't need to go anywhere. And so he does that, and it says this in verse 30, then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. He also made temples on high places and appointed priests from among the people who were not of the Levites. And if you remember Sunday, there's a little thing where the Levites come and present themselves to Rehoboam because they say Jeroboam kicked them out because he didn't want Yahweh's priests in his deal. He wanted his own gods and his own priests. And so they left. They were kicked out. And Jeroboam appointed a feast for these gods that Jeroboam himself offered sacrifices on the altar of. And he did this and went up to Bethel and instituted a feast and made offerings. And so not only is Jeroboam telling the people, don't go to Israel, he is worshiping a false god. He's making sacrifices, all these things. And because this whole thing has to do with, there's two themes in 2 Chronicles, and that's whether or not someone's heart is whole after God and how the people follow that person. Okay, so one is, the primary, one is secondary. So if my heart as the king is whole after the Lord, the people tend to follow it. If my heart as the king is divided and not whole, the people tend to follow that. And so what happens here? This thing became a sin for all Israel. Why? Because Jeroboam led them to it. And so here's the interesting thing that happens. A man of God, it says, came out of Judah and went up and told Rehoboam. It says he cried out against the altar itself, and says, "Behold, a son shall be born." This is in chapter 13 now. "A son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places, who make offerings to you." Lost my place for a second. "Make offerings to you, and human bones shall be burned on you." And he gave a sign the same day, saying, "This is the sign that the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn down, and the ashes that are on it shall be poured out." And spoiler alert, there is a king, my favorite king of all of the kings, King in Judah named Josiah, and he comes and he tears down all the high places and like it actually does happen. And so this is a prophecy that does come to pass. But when this happens, this is what Rehoboam Jeroboam is like ticked off. Like, how dare you speak against me? And so it says in chapter 13, verse 4, "When the king heard the saying of the man of God, which he cried against the altar at Bethel, Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, 'Seize him.' And his hand, when he stretched out against him, dried up so that he could not draw it back to himself." In other words, Jeroboam is sitting there and he's like, "Seize that man," and it's like his hand shrivels up and it's just stuck. It's almost like it becomes a petrified hand. It's sort of the indication here, like it's just seized up and stuck, and he can't move it anymore. And then Jeroboam said this. If you want to know where Jeroboam's heart is, this gives you all the indication you need to know. It says that the king said to the man of God, "Entreat now the favor of Yahweh your God, the Lord your God, and pray for me that my hand might be restored." And the man prays, and his hand is restored. Because God has grace, it's like, okay, God is saying, okay, I've shown you, I'm real, I'm the one true God. Don't worship falsely. And he gives Jeroboam a reprieve, and Jeroboam's heart never turns away. So it's interesting. Jeroboam says, "Pray to the Lord your God, not my God." And so Jeroboam's heart has never been for the Lord. And so what ends up happening is that Jeroboam's, he leads all of Israel to sin. And it says something very interesting later on in his life in chapter 14 of 1 Kings. It says, at that time, Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, fell sick. And Jeroboam, sent his wife down to ask Ahijah, which is a prophet, about what would happen. And it says his son is going to die because of Jeroboam's disobedience. It's ultimately what it comes down to. He says when she returns, his son's going to die. And that's exactly what happens. I lost my place here. I was saying something and I got totally distracted. I'm sorry. Sorry guys. I was scrolling through something and I hit a button and I got totally distracted. So, what happens here is that Jeroboam is a wicked person who doesn't do what was right in the sight of the Lord. And so he pays the price for it. And after the man of God comes and this prophecy happens and all these things, and Jeroboam has his hand seized up and it pulls back, at the end of chapter 13 it says, after this thing Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way, but made priests for the high places again, and among all the people, any who would, he ordained to be priests of the high places, which are places to worship false gods. And this thing became sin to the house of Jeroboam, so as to cut it off and destroy it from the face of the earth. So what happens is, when his wife is pregnant, what the prophet Ahijah tells his wife is essentially, you're not going to have this kid because Jeroboam, his line stops right here. That's it. Jeroboam stops right here. And so it's a hard thing. I'll say that. It's a hard thing. Anytime we look and we see God saying very clearly, because of your sin, essentially, I will not, I'm not only not going to bless you, you have cursed yourself. And so, but when God says, I am doing this thing, it's always a hard thing. And the question always comes to my mind is, why would God do that, right? Why would God do that? And my next question I'm always reminded of, if I can look at things objectively, is why does God ever not do that? Why is there ever anything good that occurs in our life? Why would God ever bless us? Why would God ever offer us salvation? Like, we don't really deserve any of that. And it's when you realize how wicked you are left to your own devices, how broken and how black your own heart is, then you're more surprised and blessed by the good than you are surprised and distraught by the bad, if that makes sense. You look at the bad, the darkness, let's say, and you look at it and you go, oh, well, I'm a little surprised, like you look at it and you go, well, like, what a horrible thing. I know everyone deserves that. I wish this wasn't this person's path. I wish they didn't have to go down that road, right? And when something good happens, you kind of stop and you go, oh man, like, I can't believe God would bless me in such a way because, man, I do not deserve it. I do not deserve such wonderful things. And I think understanding our own weakness, our own frailty, our own lack of our only like lack of being deserving of grace, right? We don't deserve the grace of God. We don't deserve the goodness of God. I think if we can start there, which we often want to skip over and just say, God, give me the thing I want, right? And we get upset when God doesn't give us the thing we want. But I think if we can start in the place where we go, I'm a wretched, awful sinner. I'm terrible at like being a human. Like, God created me to know Him, to worship Him, and to reflect His image wholly and completely, and I just don't. If we can start there, Not live in a place where we go, oh, I'm a terrible person, just walking around all day saying I'm a terrible person. But if we can start in the spot where we go, this is who I am, and then we go, and then we really realize each day we say, this is who I am on my own. And then we say, but God, in his, as it says in Ephesians, and with the great love with which he has loved us, has sent Jesus, and God has offered me a massive amount of grace. He's offered me a lifeline, and he has saved me, even though I am a wretched, awful sinner with a heart filled with darkness. God has offered me a lifeline, has shown me the light, has set me free from captivity, has given me freedom from sin. And therefore, now, this is like it says about Jeroboam, after all these things, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. And the idea is that now that I see this, I don't ever want to go back to that evil way. I don't ever want to go back there. And the other piece is this: because I see who I am apart from God, who I am without the grace of God, without me interacting with the grace of God and living and walking in that, then when I look at someone else who's not living in that same grace, someone else who's living in rebellion to Christ, I don't look at them and go, look at that terrible, awful person, right? I don't look at that terrible sinner. I don't look at them and like that. I can look at them and say, man, they are far from God. I can objectively identify this person does not know Jesus, and like they're a terrible human, right? But I don't look at them and with the kind of final judgment, you might say, that says they're just awful, and like we begin to decide that person doesn't deserve the grace of God. But again, if you realize you don't deserve the grace of God first, you never look at another person and think they don't deserve it, because none of us deserve it. And what it causes you to do is to see other people differently. It causes you to look at other people and say, that's me. You begin to see yourself in everyone else and say, that's me, but for the grace of God, or that was me 5 years ago, or you begin to see those things differently. And so, I always find it kind of ironic, I guess, and interesting that I see a lot of people that they just, it's like they don't understand how someone could act the way they do. But it's how we all were before Jesus. And again, when we begin to see ourselves in that light, we look at everyone else differently. We look at their life situations differently, because we begin to look and say, man, I wonder what they've gone through that made it harder for them to find Christ than for me. I wonder what they've gone through that's made that is left them in a state of hovering under that cloud of darkness and evil, whereas I was able to get out. Like, you begin to see all of these things. We look around our country, and rather than looking and saying, look at all these terrible people who are awful, who don't know anything, instead of looking at it like that, we can even see, man, but for the grace of God, that's me. Look, but for the grace of God, I'm someone storming a Capitol building, which is just a terrible, awful thing. But for the grace of God, I am a guy that sits with my knee on the back of another guy as a police officer and murders him. I don't care what you think about a verdict or a trial. You go watch the video. The officer killed George Floyd. Whether or not you agree with all the movement that's happened since then, that is an indisputable reality. And but for the grace of God, I'm the guy under the knee of that cop, right? Who's living a life that is not really, I'm not walking with the Lord, and so I find myself in these situations, right? But for the grace of God, I'm the guy under the knee. But for the grace of God, I am fill in the blank. But for the grace of God, I'm the guy that robbed that place the other night. But for the grace of God, I'm one of these people in our town that's shooting back and forth in rival gang fights that seem to be happening almost weekly at this point in our community, right? Like that is me, apart from me interacting with the grace of God that He's put in front of me, apart from me seeing the wretchedness of my own soul, and that Christ has offered me a lifeline and wants to change me. I'm one of those people sitting at the Holiday Apartments, right? Struggling through life, and I might find myself in the middle of crossfire, right? Like there's so many things that we don't even consider because we don't often stop to consider this. And I think, Jeroboam, the reason that he's remembered as Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who caused all Israel to sin, is because God gives him a massive wake-up call here. A prophet says, this is all going to be torn down. Jeroboam's hand seizes up when he tries to arrest the guy. And the prophet prays, and God, relinquishes that hold on his hand, and his hand is restored. This is God waving his hands at Jeroboam, saying, dude, I told you I would bless you if you would walk with me. Come back. And yet Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. And everything, Jeroboam's family line, kingship, it all ends right there with him. And it's because Jeroboam didn't have the perspective to stop and say, oh my goodness, if it weren't for God, I wouldn't be here in the first place. Because if you remember back, I don't know if you do, if you remember back when the kingdom is split, God gives Jeroboam 10 of these tribes. God comes to Jeroboam through a prophet and tells him what's going to happen. And Jeroboam never stops to go, man, but if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't even be here. I wouldn't be in this position. And so, Jeroboam doesn't see his people or anyone around him and say, well, if it wasn't for God, apart from God, we have nothing. My kingdom doesn't exist apart from God, right? He never gets there, and so he treats people differently. He treats men of God with detest, and he treats them terribly. And I would tell you that Jeroboam is as much of a tragic figure as anyone else, but it's also that warning sign to all of us. How often is it that you forget your own wretchedness for the sake of looking at someone else and talking and proclaiming or exclaiming how terrible they are? Because it's one thing to look and say, man, that person is clearly lost. Because then, we know how to, we need to present the gospel to them, right? Like, it's one thing to be like, I know they're lost and I know they need Jesus, and like they are making all kinds of bad decisions. And it's another thing to sort of turn your nose up and walk the other direction because you just, how detestable that person is, that place is. Well, how is that dark place going to be lit up with the gospel apart from you taking the light of the gospel to it? How is that person's heart going to be set free with the power of gospel that Jesus came to set people free with, if not for you? Because Paul says, if I don't go, then how will they hear? If I don't preach, how are people going to know? He says that in Romans. Like, it is our call. It is our responsibility to when God throws us that lifeline and we find ourselves being set free, being people that were once captives to sin but have now been set free, once captives to addiction that have now been set free, once captives to all the draw of the world and seeking the almighty dollar, but we've now been set free to know that everything, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, right? And he's going to take care of me. Once you've been set free from all of that, the idea is that we would then take that freedom and not be like Jeroboam. He's a cautionary tale. That we wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm good now. Or as we talked about on Sunday with Rehoboam, I need God until I don't. And then we would then go, oh, well, now that God set me free, I'll go live my life. The idea is that we would then take that and that our story would look different, that the back half of our story would be, and then God redeemed us. God took our shriveled up hand and he released that. And we saw we saw who we were in the light of who God is, and we then took that hope and that truth to other people. The reason I love 2 Chronicles and the stories of the kings is because I do think it's really applicable for today. I do think it's extremely applicable for the situation we find ourselves in as a world and as a country. And as our community here in Natchez and Vidalia and beyond. We always want to look and say, how dare those people do that stupid thing? And how quickly we forget that we are those people. How quickly we are to not extend the same grace to others that God has extended to us. How quickly we are to not forgive others the way that God has forgiven us, right? How quickly we are to criticize the government. We love to criticize the government. The government, I don't care if it's city, county, state, national, how terrible the government is, how terrible the government officials are. And yet, how quickly we forget that if we looked around and we were honest, the church isn't doing its job. The government is trying to solve problems that it can't because the church, in large part, has abdicated its responsibility in solving said problems. The church has the job to transform the community that it's in. The government cannot do that in the way that the church can. The church isn't doing it. Government steps in. And I'm not saying they're doing it right. I'm not saying they're doing a good job at it. All I'm saying is there's only two organizations in our country, and I would argue around the entire world, there's only two groups that have the scale, that have both the scale and the manpower. Like they're everywhere, they're in every community and all that. There's only two groups that have those things, that have the ability at scale to do something transformative in a community. And that's the government and the church. And you tell me, is the church transforming the community? And when I say the church, I don't mean the 501c3 organization that has a name. I mean you and me. We're the church, okay? Not a building. The building is not the church. This is a church building this is where the church gathers. This is not the church, okay? Now you tell me, is the church transforming the community? Or are we just sitting back hoping the government will do a better job of it? And I would tell you, aside from whether or not we are and what it would take to transform our community, for example, we have to start by looking and saying, you know what? We have to start, before we get to I don't think they're doing a good job of it, we have to stop and go examine ourselves, like, am I doing a good job of transforming the world around me? Am I? Am I being a part of transforming the people around me? Am I? We got to start there. Okay? Am I interacting with the grace of God in such a way that would be transformative in the world around me? And then, when we look at people who aren't doing things in light of the grace of God, ergo the government, they're doing things based on some rule or law that's been handed down, right? They're not worried about Jesus. They're worried about, I don't know, their own agendas, right? We look at them, we go, oh, they're doing it wrong, but it's because they don't know of the hope and the transformation that can only come when Jesus is present in a person's heart and in a community. And it changes your perspective when you realize that, because you look and you say, instead of being mad at people, maybe you begin to pray for them. Maybe you begin to go instead of complaining about your alderman or your supervisors. Maybe you call them up and you ask, how can I help? I want things to be better. How can I be a part of making things better? In Natchez, in Vidalia, in the Miss Lou, in Adams County, right? How can I be a part of making things better, rather than simply Look how terrible those people are. Like that's where that's what a Pharisee is and does, right? That's exactly what a Pharisee does. They look down their nose at the person who in their minds is either far from God, or the person who they don't think is living or doing whatever they think they should be doing, rather than saying, how can I help that person to be who I see they should be, right? How do I help be part of the solution? And I would tell you, Jeroboam here, he gets his own sin in his own heart thrown right up in front of his face for him to see in all of its glory. Here's all of your sin, Jeroboam. And then God heals his hand and there. And now Jeroboam has to decide. Is he going to continue down that path? Or is he going to say, in light of the grace that God has shown me, I'm gonna live differently, and I'm gonna change. I'm gonna transform the way that I lead and I govern and I do all this. Jeroboam makes the wrong decision, but I think that's the lesson for us to learn, right? That's it. I can read a bunch of Bible verses to you. The reality is that that's the lesson we all have to learn. Do you ever stop and pause and think, how can I be part of the solution here? Right? I mean, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're at. Like you know, I mentioned some things earlier that people might say are controversial, you know, talking about the George Floyd thing. But here's the deal. There's people that want to complain about law enforcement. You go ride around in a car with those guys. I hear the stories. I hear the stories from Rustin and what they deal with and things that he's had to deal with. You go put yourself in their shoes, it's going to change the way you view them, right? When you hear their stories, it changes the way you view them. When you begin to look and see, that's a person just like me, and they're out there fighting battles, and that I can't, then maybe it changes. Maybe you have a little more grace on how difficult it is for what they do, right? Then you're able to offer grace. But you have to start with, man, I'm a mess. And so before I complain about that person, I'm going to try to see them the way God sees me, which is a person who is in need of the grace of God, right? It changes everything. I know a guy named Kevin who he just moved to Atlanta to pastor a church there, but he's been pastoring in Detroit for a long time. He's a black guy, and he there's all kinds of hostilities for many years with policing in the community there, and so he just decided, well, I want to go build a bridge. Instead of being a guy that sits there and just complains, I'm going to go build a bridge. So what Kevin did is Kevin went through training and became a chaplain up there. And Kevin would put on his bulletproof vest and go right along with the guys in some pretty hard, pretty difficult beats around you know, in the hood in Detroit. And what Kevin will tell you today is that, yeah, there's some issues with, you know, bad policemen or some policies and all that, sure. But he'll also tell you it's a real complex issue because you know, he's now seen it from both sides, as someone in the community and as someone riding around in that police car, right? And he says, man, this is way more complicated than just, I don't like this person or that person's wrong. And I think it takes that kind of effort if we're going to not be like Jeroboam or Rehoboam, where God throws us the lifeline and we become the unmerciful debtor. As Jesus tells a story in the Gospels where a man is forgiven of a great debt and he walks away a few minutes later and he goes and chases down a much smaller debt that someone owes him and has no mercy on him and throws him in jail. We become that person very quickly if we don't stop and say, okay, before I come down on whatever person or community or organization or government or whatever, maybe I can stop and examine my own heart, first of all. And second of all, maybe I can pray, not for their destruction. Maybe I can pray for their enlightenment, that they would see the hope of Christ. And then I'm going to take an action step, and I'm going to go and do something to be part of the solution. Because, hey, if I'm not willing to go and be part of the solution, then either A, I'm part of the problem, or at the very minimum, I can't complain about the problem because I'm unwilling to do anything about it. Now, there's a difference between, I can't change policy at the federal government level. I can't. I'll never be able to, most likely. I'll never have that kind of sway, right? Can't change policy, but you know what I can do? I can change, I can build a bridge and build a relationship with one person. I can do something in the community where I live, and there may be darkness all around, but there can be this place of hope and light where Christ is king, and I can take back some ground that the enemy now owns and occupies, right? That's what I'm called to do. Transform the world where I am. All right? And so, if you are a believer today, God has offered you life. Like God, you are Jeroboam living in rebellion and with a withered up hand, and like that's who we are. And through the grace of God and the person of Jesus Christ, God has redeemed us and released us from our prisons and our addictions and all these things. God has set us free. And now we're at that place. He set us free, and what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? And I would challenge you to try your best to whenever you have the urge to look down your nose at someone who is less holy than you, someone who doesn't know the Lord, people or organizations or governments who are leading not in the way God would have them to lead. I challenge you to stop and look yourself and go, man, but for me responding to the grace of God, that would be me. That would be me doing all of those things. And so maybe that changes the way I respond to those people, right? Maybe in that moment I go, well, instead of looking down my nose and being full of anger and hatred and vitriol toward those people or that person or that organization or that government, maybe I stop and I go, okay. First of all, Jesus has shown me, modeled for me, and told me to pray for my enemies, love my enemies, and pray for those who persecute me, right? So let me start there. And then number two, I may not can change everything, but maybe is there one thing I can do, right? If someone is acting this way, living this way, making these decisions because they aren't walking in the hope of Christ, then if I have that hope, maybe I can do something about bringing hope where there isn't any, right? Maybe I can do something about that. And you might say, well, what does that look like? It doesn't necessarily look like the 501c3 organization called Crosspoint doesn't have to have its name on anything. It's just you. What are you going to do? And I would tell you, it can look like a lot of things. If you see Edwin Sampson, our missionary in the Philippines, Edwin and Amy, if you see Edwin's updates recently, he shared a couple things. He even tagged Crosspoint in Playground. That if any of you are watching, you may remember, Dad, if you're on here, or Tammy, if you're on here. We actually unloaded and moved some playground equipment. It wasn't the one we helped build. It was a different one. And he put a picture on there of it actually being finally set up and kids playing on it and tagged us in it. Like, this doesn't happen without, and he's named all the different people from around the world that were a part of it happening. And we had a small part in that. But if you want to know what it looks like to build the kingdom and transform your community and bring hope to it, Edwin started, and they started an EMT group. They have an ambulance called Hope Rescue. They go out on calls and give medical attention. They're all trained EMT workers, and like they're out doing some really hard work. And when they go and come up on someone who's been shot, someone died just the other day, and they're working to resuscitate them, to do emergency triage, and they watch someone die in the street. But you know what they do when they come up on someone that's had a motorcycle accident, and they serve them, they bandage them up, they triage and they pray for them right then and there, and they get to share the hope of Christ with them by what? By telling them if they die now they're going to hell without Jesus? No. They share the hope of Christ by by being a loving, kind individual who is present with them where they're at. They're present with them where they are. And that's what Jesus does. It's an incarnational ministry. Jesus became flesh and dwelled among us. And in the message, it says that Jesus took on flesh and blood, and he moved into the neighborhood. Go and be with people where they are, right? In their trauma, in their difficulty. Edwin and them are conducting educational and reading programs to Muslim people, and they are things that most people would never do in very poor communities. Because they know that education leads to a families being able to raise themselves up out of poverty, and in that way they can transform their community. And when people look back and they say, "Well, how did you get here?" Well, it's that Christian guy Edwin, and it's that Christian guy Jerry, and you know it's those things that they're doing to transform their community. And I would just ask you, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way, but made more priests and more high places and did all that. But if you have turned from your evil ways, my question is, Jeroboam turned back to his evil way, and he lived it. He walked it out, right? So if you are walking with Jesus, what are you doing? That's the question. What are you doing to go and walk out the building of the kingdom and the transformation of the place you find yourself? Whether that be everything from your own home to your place of work, the place you do business, your kid's school, the neighborhood where I don't know what it is like that needs transformed in your life. What I do know is that if you've been transformed, you're called not to look at everyone else and see how untransformed they are. You're called to look at everyone else and say, "Oh man, God has given me a ministry to go and bring transformation and hope where there isn't any." Otherwise, we just end up like Rehoboam or Jeroboam, a cautionary tale of people who had every opportunity to absolutely just kill it for Jesus, and yet we chose not to. And in the end, we'll stand before the Lord, and all that we've done in our life, I can tell you this, let me tell you this, all the money you earned at your job, it won't matter in eternity. It will be irrelevant. I don't care how much money you earn. It's not going to matter. All the promotions you got at your work, it's not going to matter. It's going to be completely irrelevant. All the hours you spent at the office, burned up, gone, doesn't matter. The good grades that you got in school or helped your kid get, I'm going to tell you this, listen to me, that might even be burned up. That doesn't it's not an ultimate thing, right? I'm not saying to never try, but like these are things that are ultimate things. You know what's going to matter? Number one, Jesus would be like, "Do you know me? Do I know you?" Right? And number two, who else is there that you helped to get to know me? By whatever means necessary, right? Is there evidence? Is there a trail of kingdom building behind you, right? Are there people that maybe they didn't say yes to Jesus, but they know of the hope of Christ because of you, right? That's our call. And if we don't have those two things, everything else in life is going to get burned up. Everything else we've done, and so when we look at these kings, whether in Israel or Judah, they are all massive cautionary tales for us because they all teach us that it doesn't matter who we are, it doesn't matter our station in life, it doesn't matter our position. Whenever we get far and walk away from the Lord, whenever we decide to go it our own way, as Proverbs says, there is a way that seems right to a man, and that way leads to destruction. And that destruction usually involves us, but it also involves all the people that God wanted to use us to bring hope to. There's a bunch of people that that would never hear about Jesus is someone like Edwin Sampson didn't say yes, or Amy didn't say yes, right? There's a bunch of, I would not be here. I can name you 2 or 3 people that if they didn't say yes to Jesus, I wouldn't be here. Because they took that call of transformation and they ran with it. So be part of the solution. If God has released you from the bondage and chains and sin, then go look around your community and be part of the solution. Be part of releasing the people you know, the people in our community, be part of releasing the Miss Lou from the bondage of chains and the effects of sin and darkness that hang over our community. Otherwise we're just people sitting around complaining. And it doesn't do any good. It don't do no good. And nobody wants to be around the person that just complains always, right? There's no hope in that. So, let's pray. God, I hate that the stories of people like Jeroboam and Rehoboam are they're just so awful the way they end. But God, I thank you for writing those things down through your Spirit. I thank you for history is only good insofar as it helps us to look at our present and say, well, how have we changed? How are we doing better? And so, God, I thank you that we can examine our own hearts by the stories of the past. Thank you for writing those things down to teach us lessons. God, I pray that we learn the lessons of people like Jeroboam. Lord, that we would see ourselves released and free in you and in your Spirit, God, and that we would see that and that we would run as fast as we can to tell as many as possible, Lord, that we would go and we would seek to release others from bondage, Lord, that we would seek to bring light in dark places, God, that we would not seek to come to a building on Sunday, Lord, but we would seek to be launched out of a building to do the kingdom building work you've called us to Monday through Saturday. And pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you guys were awful quiet tonight. Unless my chat window is just not working right, you guys are awful quiet, and I don't know if something happened with the stream or something. So I hope everything's okay and everybody is good out there in internet land. I know some of the people that are normally on are here with the kids tonight, and so yeah, I'll let you guys go so they can get out of here with the Next Steps class. And you guys continue to pray for that class each Wednesday. They'll be doing it for the next several weeks. And we'll pray that that's going to lead to a lot of good things. And who knows, maybe even some responses from kids. And we'll get some kids wet. And I mean that baptism is what I mean. So, hopefully some kids will give their life to Christ, right? That's why we're doing it. So, I will see you guys on Sunday. And hopefully, and we're gonna hit it again on Sunday at more 2 Chronicles, and you get a special treat Sunday. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but you get one, and a little surprise. And I will see you guys then. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you do have a really good rest of your week. But until we come back together, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.